Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Delion Peta from the World Geopolitics channel here, and in today's video we're going to watch a video that I already know a lot of people are going to call me all sorts of names for. It's undeniable we'll have a serious problem with this. It's only a matter of time. The deficit from public universities, mainly federal and some state depending on the state, will significantly impact the public budget in the coming decades. Make no mistake, it's a major issue. And if you're going to doubt me thinking, Adrian, are you against investment in education and science? No, I'm completely in favor. The problem is that investment is different from what people think. It's not just about taking and throwing money at it. You need strategy, you need goals, you need planning, which is basically what we don't see. We just throw the money, hold on to God's hand and let it go. But it's not really like that, okay? And we're going to see this in detail in today's video. Before judging, please watch the entire video and comment your thoughts at the end. I'm Delion Peta, and this is World Geopolitics. Brazil is going through a rapid demographic transition, and just to clarify, unlike what many people say out there and don't understand, the demographic crisis is not just about low birth rates and fewer births, but rather low birth rates combined at the same time with a high rate of population aging. The demographic crisis is these two things together. If you follow the channel, you know that one of the first areas to be affected will be logistics, the truck drivers, which is already being impacted. However, another area, which apparently doesn't seem so serious, but will be a colossal fiscal hole in the government's accounts, is education. The national fertility rate dropped from 2.32 children per woman in 2000 to 1.57 in 2023. And even though the forecast is to reach 1.44 around 2041, don't worry about it. We'll reach that much earlier than 2041, probably before 2030, at least 11 years ahead of the official estimate. And as an obvious result, the young population is shrinking. Today there are about 56 million Brazilians up to 20 years old in 2025, but official projections estimate 32 million in 2070. And again, keep in mind that official projections have been grossly and generously wrong about the timing of these forecasts, so we'll probably reach this much sooner. Anyway, between 2030 and 2040, the proportion of elderly people will definitely surpass that of young people, reversing Brazil's age pyramid. We will get old like the developed countries, but we will remain poor like the developing countries. This demographic reality isn't the same nationwide. States in the south and southeast regions, which have had fewer births for decades, are already feeling the impact more intensely, but not only there. The north and northeast, which still have a relatively high rate, have been slowing down at an even faster pace than the south and southeast. And, in the overall picture, population aging is a national and irreversible trend, at least for now, bringing serious problems to sectors that depend on a young base. What does education say specifically? An area that will not only be affected by this apparent inevitable demographic crisis, but also suffers from incompetence and corruption in the federal government, state governments, and municipal governments of Brazil. In recent decades, Brazil has greatly expanded its public higher education network. Today, there are 69 federal universities, 20 of which were created in the last 25 years alone, and about 40 state universities spread throughout the country. Hundreds of new campuses and federal institutes have opened in rural areas, expanding free course availability across nearly all regions. As part of two larger official objectives and one main unofficial one, the first official goal is to magically create qualified professionals in higher education by creating more spots, as if simply opening more spots would necessarily result in more qualified professionals. And the second is bringing a large number of students to smaller cities as a way to stimulate the local economy, making some cities virtually dependent on the presence of students and staff from these federal institutions. And the other unofficial reason is to give the false impression that the federal government was investing in education. And I say a false impression, because by doing this they ended up excessively prioritizing higher education to the detriment of basic education. And of course, investing in education is a very good thing, very positive, but only when it's done the right way, like South Korea and China did in the past. And today the one who is doing it very well is Vietnam. In all successful cases, prioritizing basic education, the most fundamental, is the main focus, only moving on to higher education over the decades. But Brazil didn't want to start from the top, suddenly producing qualified professionals in higher education. After all, expanding public higher education brought visibility and votes, whereas investing in basic education not only takes longer to show results, but is also something much less visible politically speaking. And make no mistake, the importance of these universities and institutes for some cities is nothing less than their very existence. Because between 2003 and 2010, the number of municipalities served by federal universities jumped from 114 to 272. The federal institutes expanded impressively. Between 2005 and 2016, 422 new campuses of federal institutes were established, totaling 682 units in the federal network of professional and technological education. By 2023, with an expansion plan underway, the goal is to reach 782. This presence has turned many of these cities into college towns. Small and medium-sized municipalities that previously didn't have higher education now host federal campuses, attracting students from outside and boosting the local economy. The main state in this regard is Minas Gerais, with 19 federal units established between 2000 and 2010, most of them in the countryside. It's not just about occupying the countryside, but also about stimulating the economy in the interior of the state. Northeastern and northern states also started to have a federal university in inland regions, where there was previously little diversified economic activity. This made federal institutions become central economic engines in many of these cities, generating jobs, income, and stimulating sectors such as commerce, services, and civil construction. The economic contribution of these institutions in their host city can be measured in terms of their share in the municipal gross domestic product job creation and financial activity. Although there is not always precise official data on the gross domestic product generated by a university in the city, case studies and institutional surveys provide some idea. In Lavras, in Minas Gerais, for example, the federal university has become a very important economic factor, even bigger than the city hall itself in financial terms. Between 2007 and 2016, the annual funds managed by Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais jumped from 164 million to 353 million. Meanwhile, the total revenue of the municipality grew from 170 million to only 242 million. In 2015, for example, the budget of UFLA was about 69% higher than the entire revenue of the Lavras City Hall. Another notable example is Santa Maria in Rio Grande do Sul, where local commerce increases its revenue by more than 30%. With the return of university classes at the beginning of every year, real estate agencies, furniture stores, and electronics stores see an increase in sales of 30% to 50%. But especially when the 30,000 students return to classes. And these are just two examples of a reality that repeats itself throughout the entire country. In many of these cases, local public education spending acts as the engine of the municipal economy, with salaries for teachers, technicians, and outsourced workers paid by the federal government, boosting the commerce and services of the cities. Outside the capitals, inland cities with universities or federal institutes have a high participation of the public sector in their economy, often above the national average. This dependence makes the municipality apparently feel secure from national economic fluctuations. After all, the salaries of public servants and public spending maintain a certain stability even during crises, but instead of this turning into an opportunity, the incompetence of the mayors, in the vast majority of cases, ended up creating a dependence and addiction to public resources, which in practice resulted in low economic diversification. However, this apparent advantage will soon become a budgetary nightmare for the entire country, because with the reduction in the number of young people graduating from high school, a mismatch is beginning to emerge between the installed capacity of universities and the real demand from students. This leads to an excess of vacancies and underutilized courses. In the face of the demographic crisis, recent indicators are already becoming evident, showing the emptying of higher education as demand decreases, with the number of applicants for the INEM dropping from 8.7 million in 2014 to just 3.4 million in 2022. Reaching the lowest level in 17 years with a slight increase to 4.3 million in 2024. Similarly, traditional entrance exams in São Paulo, like Unicamp and UNESP, have recorded fewer applicants, with 2022 seeing the lowest number of registrations since 2012. And besides the drop in demand, there's also the issue of unfilled spots. Because in 2023 approximately half of the spots offered at public universities were not filled, leaving around 285,000 vacant spots that year. In other words, a very large portion of the course structure was left without students, enough to fill those spots. At the Federal University of Santa Catarina, for example, there was an increase of 1,800% in the number of courses with fewer applicants than available spots between 2019 and 2023. This means that many courses are not even able to attract a number of students equivalent to the available spots, indicating that the supply is much higher than the demand. And what's worse, with the fact that about 60% of students at federal universities drop out before graduating, resulting today in only a 40% completion rate. Which, okay, wouldn't be a problem if we were talking about a private institution, for example, where the student pays with their own resources. But considering that public universities are maintained with public money, this mass dropout worsens idleness, because even spots that were initially filled end up becoming vacant over the years and costing the same amount. With fewer young people enrolling and half of the seats unoccupied in many courses, it becomes very clear that there is an excess capacity scenario. That is, if Brazilian demographic trends are maintained, the public higher education system will be sized for a much larger number of young people than the one that will actually exist. This will result in empty classrooms and underutilized courses throughout the country. But unlike private institutions, where a drop in revenue forces the university to cut expenses, this does not happen in the case of public universities. The expenses not only remain but actually increase as employees have their salaries adjusted. The budgetary impact of this imbalance between educational supply and demand will be devastating, because public universities operate with costs that always start from a fixed baseline. Professors, technicians, and other staff are tenured employees with job security, which means they cannot be dismissed as a way to respond to the reduction in students. Faculty also have career plans that ensure automatic raises based on service years and academic qualifications. This rigidity creates a spending structure that is difficult to adjust when the institution needs to downsize. Currently, most of the budget of public universities is consumed by payroll expenses. On average, federal universities spend nearly 90% of their resources just on salaries and staff benefits. And at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, for example, one of the largest in the country, the annual budget is around 3.9 billion reais. About 9 out of every 10 reais are allocated to paying salaries, leaving less than 10% for maintenance, investments in laboratories, scholarships, and everything else you can imagine. This percentage had been increasing. It was about 80% in 2014 and got close to 90% in 2021. Because of staff expansion and the automatic progression of salaries. So, if the financial structure of many institutions was already on the verge of collapse even before we started thinking about a demographic crisis, imagine the size of the deficit with the drop in young people. The core of the problem is that personnel expenses are highly inflexible. Each tenured professor hired represents a spending commitment for several decades, and they can't be fired or laid off. Except in cases of extremely serious misconduct, this professor will continue to receive payments after retirement through public social security, as an analysis pointed out. In practice, every professor who joins the system will be supported until the last day of their life. Given the job stability and guaranteed retirement, their salaries also increase automatically as they advance in their careers. In other words, the cost not only remains, but tends to grow in the long run, regardless of whether the course has students or not. This creates a fiscal time bomb in scenarios with empty classrooms, as the university is unable to reduce expenses at the same rate that it loses students. But there's an even worse detail to this, which is the high salary level of the faculty in Brazilian public institutions, especially that of the much older professors, which is completely undefined and incompatible with the reality of the country. In fact, at a certain level, even compared to the world, when the salary is converted to dollars, okay, it reaches a certain global average level. But the level of demand they have in their careers for producing articles is pathetically low. Some go decades without publishing a single paper. The salaries of tenured university professors are among the highest in the civil public service. For example, a full professor at the top of their career under the exclusive dedication regime will receive a minimum base salary of 22,000 reais per month. And look, we're talking about the minimum base salary for the most senior professors. Because with additional bonuses, extra duties, and management positions, which are not rare, there are quite a few cases of salaries reaching 30, 40, or even 50,000 Rs. Do federal universities have the highest regular salaries, limited by the federal ceiling, which is the salary of the Supreme Federal Court justices? The typical net salary in that range would be around 25 to 27,000 with favorable court decisions. Some of these federal employees have been receiving a gross salary of 50 to 65,000 and a net salary of 30 to 45,000. At the state universities of São Paulo, historically, it's been a long time since the highest salaries have surpassed the state ceiling, which used to be 23,000. We have examples of retired professors from University of São Paulo with 60,000 reais in 2014 and 69 in 2019 gross for older retired professors still protected by court injunctions. There are even higher payments ranging from 50 to 70,000 at state universities in other states. It varies a lot from case to case depending on the wealth and budget of the state, in some cases of certain states, with salaries that are actually quite modest, but still salaries that are many times higher than the average Brazilian family income. And the older and more retired they are, the higher the salary gets, which is scary and a problem considering the future scenario. And who is going to end up paying for this? It's exactly the new teachers who are just now starting to enter these public positions, with base salaries around 5 to 6,000, which will probably stay frozen for decades, to make up for the high salaries of the older ones. And on top of that, they have to cover the activities of the retirees and other older staff, overloading exactly those who are coming in now with lower salaries. These amounts are multiples of the national average salary and are very rare in the Brazilian private sector. This reflects a ridiculously overvalued position in a career that, in general, is being extremely undervalued. However, from a budgetary point of view, this frightening payroll, combined with thousands of tenured professors, results in a high and inflexible cost for the state to sustain for such an indefinite period. This is especially unjustifiable in a scenario where the number of students per teacher is only expected to plummet due to the shrinking student population. Experts warn that there will be an oversized workforce in the school systems. Just as an example, the public education system, considering all levels, employs about 1,860 teachers. But in the future, we may need fewer than 1 million teachers, which obviously will be reflected in higher education, where there will be more teachers than necessary to serve the increasingly smaller classes, unless there are reforms in hiring and dismissal rules. This excess of paid teachers will create a permanent hole in public finances. This will lead Brazil to extremely high expenses, even with low student enrollment for the rest of the century. And just a quick note here, folks, regarding today's video. Today the point is that one thing that university professors argue about public universities, and they're right in this sense, is that they're not just classroom teachers. A lot of people don't understand this. Universities are not there just to teach classes. The role of a professor at a public or private university should be like this. In Brazil it's not, but it should be, to do research. So, in fact, it's not just about teaching classes. Teaching 8 hours a week is fine, because the rest of the time they're doing research, developing articles, papers, and publications. It should be like that, but it's not really like that. The truth is, we're seeing many cases. There are plenty of cases of professors who simply don't publish and don't do research in the humanities. This is catastrophic, but I also see people bringing me cases from the biological and exact sciences fields, which aren't that different. It's a very serious problem. It's not uncommon for professors to earn 20, 30, 40, even 50,000 Rs a month in salary, not counting benefits. And they publish a paper every 4 or 5 years. I've even seen cases of 8 years. The guy who, after passing the exam and probation, stopped publishing, just stayed, got paid, taught classes, and claims to supervise students, saying he's not supervising, so it's not that simple. It should be like that, but we don't see this translating into scientific publications either, especially top-tier ones, right? So that's an issue that needs to be brought up here. And if you're watching this video and you're doing a master's, a doctor of philosophy, or a postdoc, you know I'm telling the truth. Because you've at least heard of one case like this involving some big shot in your department, whether it's in humanities, exact sciences, or biological sciences. The truth is even worse, but you've already heard of a case like this, right? So yes, it's an issue that really exists, okay? They're earning very high salaries, completely out of touch with the realistic standards of Brazilian reality. Travel allowances, depending on the country, are even above the international standard depending on the department, and they don't produce enough to justify that, so something needs to be reviewed. However, don't be fooled because of Brazilian laws. This budget is tied up at best until 2060, and it will most likely go until 2080 or 2070. In other words, we've just finished a quarter of the century, but the public budget with these professionals is tied up for the rest of the 21st century. Whoever messes with this issue, better be prepared, because it's going to cause trouble, it's going to go badly. Messing with this area will be problematic, but so will leaving it alone. Well, the forces of the universe are going to act anyway, and the blow will come because someone has to pay the price. But anyway, guys, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't agree, if you disagree with what I said, before you start bashing me, leave a comment, say what you don't agree with or what you think. If there's any point I missed, feel free to comment. Be civilized, you don't need to start insulting me, since people love to insult me for no reason, just comment. Let's at least try to be civilized. I'll probably read your comment, alright? And if you agree, leave your points too, if you think I left something out as well. The video is already quite long, so adding more would make it a documentary. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed it. Share it. Help the channel keep growing by sharing this video with everyone you know, because this channel is practically a cult channel, obscure, forgotten by YouTube. So your help is really important, alright? Hugs, thank you, and see you in the next video.